The rain fell in a relentless drizzle, coating the windshield of the old pickup truck with a sheen that distorted the world outside. The wipers groaned with each sluggish sweep, barely keeping up with the downpour. Inside, the air was thick with unspoken tension, the kind that settles like damp rot between people who've been at odds for too long. Clara sat in the passenger seat, her arms crossed, staring out at the blurred shapes of pine trees that lined the narrow highway. Her father, Martin, gripped the steering wheel with knuckles white as bone, his jaw set in a way that told her he was chewing on words he wouldn't let out. In the back, her younger cousin Ellie fiddled with a frayed friendship bracelet, her small frame hunched as if she could make herself disappear. They were headed to Blackthorn Hollow, a speck of a town nestled deep in the Appalachian foothills, a place Clara hadn't seen since she was a child. The reason for the trip hung over them like a storm cloud. Martin's estranged sister, Lila, had been found dead in her home, under circumstances the local sheriff called unsettling. Clara didn't know the details. Martin had been tight-lipped, only saying it was a family matter, and they needed to be there for the memorial. Ellie, Lila's daughter, had been staying with them for the past month, ever since the authorities had taken her out of Blackthorn Hollow. The girl hadn't spoken much since, her eyes carrying a weight no 12-year-old should bear. Clara shifted in her seat, the cracked leather creaking beneath her. She was 22, fresh out of college, and had planned to spend her summer interning at a graphic design firm in the city, not driving 8 hours into the middle of nowhere. But Martin had insisted, his voice gruff with that rare edge of desperation that made her comply. "It's for Ellie," he'd said. And that was enough. Clara glanced at her cousin in the rearview mirror. Ellie's gaze was fixed on her bracelet, her fingers twisting the faded threads as if they held some secret. The road twisted deeper into the mountains, the trees growing denser, their branches clawing at the sky. The radio had long since fizzled out, leaving only the patter of rain and the occasional rattle of the truck's engine. Clara's phone had no signal, the bars replaced by a mocking "no service" that made her feel cut off from the world. She tried to distract herself by studying the landscape, but it was oppressive. Endless shades of gray and green, the kind of place that felt like it could swallow you whole. "Do you think we'll make it before dark?" Clara asked, breaking the silence. Martin grunted, his eyes never leaving the road. "If this damn rain lets up, maybe." Ellie didn't look up, but her fingers paused for a moment before resuming their restless dance with the bracelet. Clara wanted to ask her about Blackthorn Hollow, about Lila, about what had happened, but the girl's silence was a wall she didn't know how to breach. Instead, she turned back to the window, watching as a faded sign loomed into view. "Welcome to Blackthorn Hollow. Pop. You choose on Iki." The paint was peeling, the letters barely legible, as if the town itself was trying to fade away. They turned onto a gravel road that crunched under the tires, leading them past a cluster of weathered houses. The homes were small, their wooden siding warped and gray, porches sagging under the weight of neglect. A few had lights on, but the windows were dark, like eyes that refused to meet your gaze. At the end of the road stood a larger building, its steeple piercing the low-hanging clouds. A church, Clara realized, though it looked more like a relic than a place of worship. Martin pulled into the driveway of a small house just beyond the church. It was Lila's, he'd said, though it hardly looked lived in. The paint was chipped, the gutters rusted, and the front yard was a tangle of weeds. Clara's stomach tightened as they stepped out of the truck, the rain soaking through her hoodie in seconds. Ellie clung to her side, her small hand gripping Clara's sleeve. "Stay close," Martin muttered, grabbing their bags from the truck bed. "We're not staying long." Inside, the house smelled of mildew and something sharper, like old copper. The furniture was sparse, a sagging couch, a coffee table littered with unopened mail, a single lamp casting a weak glow. Clara's eyes darted to the walls, expecting photos or personal touches, but there was nothing. Just bare plaster, stained in places as if the house itself was bleeding. Ellie hesitated at the threshold, her eyes wide. "I don't want to stay here," she whispered. So soft, Clara almost missed it. "It's just for a couple of days," Clara said, trying to sound reassuring. "We'll be okay." Martin set the bags down with a thud. "Clara, take Ellie to the back room. I need to talk to the sheriff before the memorial tomorrow." Clara nodded, though unease prickled at the back of her neck. She led Ellie down a narrow hallway to a small bedroom with 2 twin beds, their mattresses bare except for faded quilts. The window overlooked the church, its steeple a dark silhouette against the stormy sky. Ellie sat on one of the beds, her hands folded in her lap, staring at the floor. "Do you want to talk about it?" Clara asked, sitting beside her. "About your mom?" Ellie shook her head, her lips pressed into a thin line. Clara sighed, pulling out her phone to check for service. Still nothing. She tucked it back into her pocket, feeling the weight of their isolation. "Okay," she said softly. "But I'm here if you need me." Martin returned an hour later, his face grim. "Sheriff says the memorial's at noon tomorrow. We'll head out after." He didn't elaborate, and Clara didn't press. She could see the strain in his eyes, the way his shoulders slumped as if carrying something heavier than their luggage. That night, Clara lay awake, the house creaking around her. Ellie's breathing was soft and steady across the room, but Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The air felt too still, too heavy, like the moment before a scream. She got up, tiptoeing to the window. The church loomed outside, its steeple cutting through the fog like a blade. For a moment, she thought she saw a flicker of movement in the shadows near its base. But when she blinked, it was gone. The next morning, the rain had stopped, leaving the world damp and grey. The memorial was held in the church, a cavernous space with pews that smelled of old wood and wax. The townsfolk were a sparse crowd, their faces weathered and guarded, their whispers falling silent when Clara and her family entered. Lila's casket was closed, a simple wooden box at the front of the room, adorned with a single wreath of wilted flowers. Clara couldn't shake the feeling that the people around her were watching not with grief, but with something closer to fear. The service was brief, the pastor's words hollow and rehearsed. Martin sat rigid, his hands clenched in his lap, while Ellie stared at the floor, her bracelet now a tangled mess in her fingers. Clara tried to focus on the pastor, but her eyes kept drifting to the back of the church, where a heavy wooden door stood slightly ajar, revealing a sliver of darkness beyond. After the service, the townsfolk dispersed quickly, their footsteps echoing on the gravel outside. Martin lingered, speaking in low tones with the sheriff, a wiry man with eyes that seemed to see too much. Clara took Ellie's hand, leading her outside to escape the oppressive atmosphere. The air was cool, the ground slick with mud. Ellie pulled away, her gaze fixed on the church. "Ellie, what's wrong?" Clara asked. The girl's voice was barely a whisper. "She's not gone." Clara frowned, crouching to meet her cousin's eyes. "Who? Your mom?" Ellie shook her head, her expression unreadable. "Something else." Before Clara could press further, Martin called them back to the house. The sheriff had left, and Martin's mood was darker than before. "We're leaving tomorrow morning," he said, his voice clipped. No arguments. Clara wanted to ask what the sheriff had told him, but the look in his eyes stopped her. Instead, she spent the afternoon exploring the house, hoping to find something, anything, that might explain Lila's death or Ellie's cryptic words. The kitchen was bare, the fridge empty, except for a jar of pickles and a half-empty bottle of ketchup. The living room held nothing but the couch and a stack of old newspapers. The headlines faded but unsettling. Local woman missing. Unexplained noises in Blackthorn woods. Sheriff urges caution after nighttime disturbance. Upstairs, Lila's bedroom was locked, the door heavy and unyielding. Clara pressed her ear to it, hearing nothing but the faint groan of the house settling. She glanced at Ellie, who was sitting on the couch, her eyes distant. "Ellie, do you know what's in there?" Ellie didn't answer, but her fingers tightened around her bracelet, snapping one of the threads. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. The house felt alive, its creaks and groans like whispers in a language she couldn't understand. She checked on Ellie, who was curled up under her quilt, her breathing uneven. Clara's phone was useless. The lack of service, a constant reminder of how cut off they were. She wandered to the living room, her bare feet cold against the hardwood floor. The newspapers were still there, their headlines gnawing at her curiosity. She picked one up, scanning the faded print. The article about the missing woman mentioned a name: Sarah Whitaker, last seen near the church. Another article described strange lights in the woods, attributed to local folklore, about creatures that lurked in the hollow. A soft thud came from upstairs, pulling Clara from her thoughts. She froze, her heart pounding. It came again. Louder this time, like something heavy being dragged across the floor. She grabbed a flashlight from her bag, its beam weak but steady, and crept up the stairs. The sound was coming from Lila's locked room. She pressed her ear to the door, her breath catching as she heard a low, guttural moan, followed by the unmistakable sound of scratching. "Dad!" she whispered, though she knew Martin was asleep in the guest room downstairs. The scratching stopped, replaced by a silence so deep it felt like a void. Clara's hand trembled as she reached for the doorknob, half expecting it to be locked. To her surprise, it turned. The room was dark, the air thick with the smell of dust and something metallic. Her flashlight swept across the space, revealing a bed with rumpled sheets, a dresser covered in cobwebs, and a mirror that reflected her own pale face. In the corner, a pile of clothes lay crumpled, but as her light lingered, she realized they weren't clothes at all. It was a body. Clara stumbled back, her scream caught in her throat. The figure was motionless, its limbs twisted at unnatural angles, its face obscured by matted hair. She backed toward the door, her flashlight shaking, when a hand grabbed her ankle. She yelped, spinning around to find Ellie, her eyes wide with terror. "Don't go in there," Ellie whispered. "It's not safe." Clara's voice was barely audible. "What is that?" Ellie didn't answer, but her grip tightened, pulling Clara back into the hallway. The door slammed shut behind them, the sound echoing through the house. Clara's heart raced as she led Ellie downstairs, her mind reeling. She didn't know what she'd seen. But it wasn't human. Not entirely. Martin was awake when they reached the living room, his face pale. "What the hell's going on?" he demanded. Clara tried to explain, her words tumbling out in a rush. Martin listened, his expression darkening with each sentence. When she finished, he grabbed his keys. "We're leaving, now." "But it's the middle of the night," Clara protested. "And Ellie." "No arguments," Martin snapped. "Get your things." They packed quickly, the house's oppressive silence urging them on. Ellie clung to Clara, her small body trembling. As they loaded the truck, Clara noticed the church's steeple glowing faintly, as if lit from within. She shook it off, blaming her nerves, but the unease lingered. The drive out of Blackthorn Hollow was tense, the road slick with fresh rain. Clara kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something following them. Ellie was silent, her bracelet now a single thread wrapped around her wrist. Martin's hands were steady on the wheel, but his eyes darted to the shadows beyond the headlights. They were an hour out when Ellie spoke, her voice so soft, Clara almost missed it. "It's still here." Clara turned, her stomach dropping. "What's still here, Ellie?" The girl didn't answer, but her eyes were fixed on the darkness outside. Clara followed her gaze, catching a glimpse of movement. A tall, gaunt figure, standing just beyond the road's edge, its eyes glinting like polished obsidian. She blinked, and it was gone. "Dad, did you see that?" Clara asked, her voice shaking. Martin didn't respond, but his grip on the wheel tightened. The truck sped up, the engine roaring as they tore through the night. Clara's heart pounded, her mind racing with questions she didn't dare ask. What had they left behind in Blackthorn Hollow? And what had followed them out? The weeks that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and unanswered questions. They settled back into their city apartment, but the shadow of Blackthorn Hollow lingered. Ellie withdrew further, her once bright eyes dulled by whatever she'd seen. Martin refused to talk about Lila, deflecting Clara's questions with gruff dismissals. Clara scoured the internet for information about the town, but Blackthorn Hollow was a ghost online. No records, no news articles, nothing beyond a few vague mentions of Appalachian folklore. One night, unable to sleep, Clara found Ellie sitting on the couch, staring at the wall. The single thread from her bracelet was tied around her finger, tight enough to leave a mark. "Ellie," Clara said softly, sitting beside her, "you need to tell me what happened. What did you mean when you said it's still here?" Ellie's voice was hollow. "It's not just one thing, it's them. They live in the hollow. They always have." Clara's blood ran cold. "Who are they?" Ellie's eyes met hers, and for the first time, Clara saw not fear, but resignation. "They're the ones who took Mum. They wear faces that aren't theirs. They sound like people you know, but they're not." Clara's mind flashed to the figure in Lila's room, the twisted body that had seemed both familiar and alien. She wanted to dismiss it as trauma, as a child's imagination run wild, but the memory of those glinting eyes on the road haunted her. "Did they do something to your mom?" Clara asked, dreading the answer. Ellie nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "They wanted her to stay, forever." Clara didn't sleep that night. She sat up, her laptop open, searching for anything that might explain what Ellie meant. She found fragments, old stories about skinwalkers and mimics, creatures that could take on human forms to lure their prey. Most dismissed them as myths, but a few accounts, buried in obscure forums, described encounters in remote towns like Blackthorn Hollow. People who'd gone missing, only to be found days later, their bodies twisted and wrong. Voices heard in the night, mimicking loved ones. The next morning, Clara confronted Martin. "Dad, we need to talk about Blackthorn Hollow. About Lila, about what Ellie's saying." Martin's face hardened. "There's nothing to talk about. Lila's gone. We're done with that place." "But Ellie's scared," Clara pressed. "She's talking about things that don't make sense. Things that I saw something too." Martin's eyes flickered, a crack in his stoic facade. "You saw nothing," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Just let it go, Clara." She didn't let it go. That night, she found a key hidden in Martin's jacket. A heavy, rusted thing that didn't match any lock in their apartment. On a hunch, she drove back to Blackthorn Hollow alone, the key burning a hole in her pocket. The town was just as she'd left it, shrouded in mist, the houses silent and watchful. She parked near Lila's house, her heart pounding as she approached the front door. The key fit perfectly. Inside, the air was colder than before, the smell of copper stronger. Clara's flashlight swept across the living room, catching on something new. A trapdoor in the floor, partially hidden under a rug. She hesitated, her breath shallow, before pulling it open. A wooden ladder descended into darkness, the air below thick with the scent of earth and decay. She climbed down, her flashlight revealing a dirt-floored basement lined with shelves. Jars filled with dark liquid lined the walls, their contents unidentifiable but unsettling. In the center of the room was a crude altar, surrounded by bones and scraps of fabric. Clara's stomach churned as she recognized a piece of Ellie's bracelet among the debris. A sound behind her made her spin, her flashlight catching a figure in the shadows. It was tall, its limbs unnaturally long, its face a grotesque mockery of Lila's. Its eyes glinted, reflecting the light like a predator's. Clara stumbled back, her hand fumbling for the ladder. The thing didn't move, but its voice, Lila's voice, echoed in the dark. "Clara," it said, soft and pleading. "Stay with us." She scrambled up the ladder, her heart in her throat, and slammed the trapdoor shut. She didn't stop running until she was back in her car, the engine roaring as she sped out of Blackthorn Hollow. The key was still in her pocket, but she threw it out the window somewhere along the highway, as if it could sever the connection to that place. Back home, Clara told Martin everything. For the first time, he listened, his face pale. He admitted that Lila had been involved in something strange in Blackthorn Hollow, something tied to the town's history and the things that lived in its shadows. He didn't know the details, only that she'd warned him never to bring Ellie back. "We need to protect her," Clara said, her voice firm. "Whatever's out there, it's not done with us." Martin nodded, his eyes haunted. They moved Ellie to a new city, far from the mountains, but Clara couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. At night, she'd hear whispers, faint and fleeting, in voices she almost recognized. Ellie's bracelet was gone, but Clara kept a piece of thread she'd found in the basement, a reminder of what they'd escaped. Or what they hadn't. Years later, Clara would drive past abandoned buildings and wonder if they held doorways to places like Blackthorn Hollow. Places where the past wasn't just a memory, but a trap. She never went back, but the weight of that night stayed with her, a shadow that lingered in the corners of her vision, waiting for her to look too long